When billionaire James Matthews is left at the altar by his college sweetheart Emma, he spends 15 years building an empire of wealth and power. But when a cancer diagnosis leads him to discover the heartbreaking truth behind Emma's disappearance, he learns that true love requires the ultimate sacrifice. But before we continue this emotional journey, don't forget to hit subscribe and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from today. The morning sun shone through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Inside, florists rushed around putting final touches on white roses and lilies that lined the aisle. This was supposed to be the wedding of the year. James Matthews, one of New York's richest tech entrepreneurs, was finally marrying his college sweetheart, Emma Sullivan. James stood in front of a full-length mirror in the church's side room, fixing his black bow tie. At 30 years old, he had everything a man could want. His company, Matthews Tech, was worth billions. He lived in a mansion overlooking Central Park, and in less than an hour, he would marry the only woman he had ever loved. "Stop fiddling with that tie, Marcus," Wright said, walking into the room. Marcus had been James's best friend since college and was now his business partner. "You'll mess it up." "I can't help it," James replied, his hands shaking slightly. "I just want everything to be perfect for Emma." Marcus walked over and straightened James's tie himself. "Relax. In an hour, you'll be married to the girl of your dreams. What could possibly go wrong?" Those words would come back to haunt James later. The church filled up quickly. 500 of New York's most important people sat in the wooden pews. Business leaders, politicians, celebrities. Camera crews waited outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the happy couple. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a social event that would be talked about for years. James stood at the altar, his heart pounding as the organ music started playing. The huge wooden doors at the back of the church opened. Emma appeared in her white dress, looking like an angel. Her dark hair was pulled back, showing off her beautiful face. Around her neck was the diamond necklace James had given her that morning. But something was wrong. Even from far away, James could see that Emma had been crying. Her face was pale, and her steps were shaky as she walked down the aisle. James felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't the happy walk of a bride coming to meet her groom. Emma reached the altar. Up close, James could see her red eyes and trembling lips. Before he could say anything, she grabbed his hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. She pulled off the $400,000 engagement ring, the one James had specially designed for her. She pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Keep the ring. I'm leaving." The words hit James like a physical blow. "Emma, what?" But she was already turning away, tears streaming down her face. Emma picked up her dress and ran back down the aisle. The church erupted in shocked whispers. Camera flashes went off as reporters captured the moment. James stood frozen, the ring burning in his hand like a hot coal. Marcus stepped forward, putting a hand on James's shoulder. James shrugged him off. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stand straight. 500 pairs of eyes watched him, waiting to see what he would do. The whispers grew louder. People pulled out their phones, recording everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," James said, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet, "there will not be a wedding today. Please accept my apologies." He walked out of the church, his head held high even as his world crumbled around him. Outside, reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Matthews, did you know this was going to happen? Was there another man? What went wrong?" James ignored them, all climbing into his black Rolls-Royce. "Drive," he told his chauffeur, "just drive." That night, alone in his mansion, James sat in his dark office. The ring sat on his desk, catching the moonlight. His phone had hundreds of missed calls and messages, but he ignored them all. He pulled up his laptop and opened his email. In less than an hour, he cancelled the honeymoon arrangements, the new house he had bought for them, everything that was supposed to be part of their future together. The next morning, James walked into his company's headquarters wearing a perfectly pressed suit. His face showed no sign of the previous day's humiliation. He called an emergency board meeting. "Gentlemen," he announced to the room full of surprised executives, "I've decided to expand the company. I want to acquire our 3 main competitors by the end of the year." "But sir," one board member protested, "that would cost billions. The risk—" "I don't care about the risk," James cut him off. "Make it happen." And so began James Matthews' transformation. Over the next 15 years, he turned his successful company into an empire. He became known as the Ice King of the tech world, brilliant but ruthless. He drove competitors out of business without mercy. He fired anyone who failed to meet his impossible standards. The warm, loving man who had stood at that altar died the day Emma left, replaced by someone who cared only about power and success. The engagement ring stayed locked in his desk drawer. Sometimes, late at night, he would take it out and look at it, wondering why Emma had left him, but he never tried to find out. He was too afraid of the answer. No one ever saw him date again. The society pages speculated about his relationships with beautiful models and actresses, but they were all business arrangements, carefully staged by his PR team. The real James Matthews had closed his heart the day it was broken in St. Patrick's Cathedral. 15 years passed this way. James turned 45, his dark hair now touched with grey at the temples. His company was worth hundreds of billions. He lived alone in an even bigger mansion, surrounded by expensive things that brought him no joy. He had everything money could buy, but he had lost something money couldn't replace: his humanity. Then one day, a routine doctor's appointment changed everything. James sat in an expensive leather chair across from Dr. Sarah Chen, barely listening as she reviewed his test results. He was checking email on his phone when her words cut through his distraction. "Mr. Matthews, I'm afraid I have some serious news." Dr. Chen put down her tablet and looked directly at James. "The tests show you have a rare form of cancer. It's aggressive, and it's already spread to several organs." James sat very still, his phone forgotten in his hand. For the first time in 15 years, his carefully controlled world shifted beneath his feet. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough. "With treatment, maybe a year. Without it, 6 months." Dr. Chen's voice softened. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Matthews. We need to start treatment immediately." James nodded, not really hearing her as she explained about chemotherapy and radiation. His mind was racing, thinking about his company, his empire. Who would run things? Who could he trust? "It reminds me of another case," Dr. Chen said, almost to herself. "Emma Sullivan. She had a similar fighting spirit when she was going through her illness." James's head snapped up. "What did you say?" Dr. Chen looked startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned another patient. It's just that Miss Sullivan made such an impression on all of us. The way she sacrificed everything to save her sister." "What are you talking about?" James demanded, leaning forward. "What sacrifice?" Dr. Chen's face showed her confusion. "You don't know? But weren't you and Emma Sullivan?" She stopped, realizing she might be revealing something she shouldn't. "Please," James said, his voice barely a whisper. "I need to know." Dr. Chen hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. It was 15 years ago. Emma's younger sister, Sarah, had leukemia. Emma was a perfect bone marrow match. But the donation process was risky because of Emma's own health conditions. She knew it could leave her with lifelong complications, but she didn't hesitate. James felt like he couldn't breathe. "When exactly was this? Let me check." Dr. Chen typed something into her computer. The donation was made on March 15, 2010, 3 days before their wedding, the day Emma had suddenly started acting strange and distant. "What complications?" James asked, dreading the answer. "The donation triggered a rare autoimmune response. Emma's body started attacking itself. She spent months in the hospital. Her recovery was very difficult." Dr. Chen looked at James with sympathy. "I always thought it was strange that her fiancé never visited her, but now I realize you didn't know." James stood up so quickly his chair fell over. "I have to go." "Mr. Matthews, wait, we need to discuss your treatment plan." But James was already out the door. He pulled out his phone as he rushed to his car. "Janet," he barked at his assistant, "cancel everything for the next week and get me everything you can find about Emma Sullivan from the past 15 years. Medical records, addresses, everything. But sir, those would be confidential. I don't care what it costs or who you have to pay. Just do it." Back in his office, James unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. The ring box was still there, untouched after all these years. He opened it, looking at the diamond that had cost more than most people's homes. "Why didn't you tell me, Emma?" he whispered. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Marcus, walking in without waiting for permission like he always did. "James, what's going on? Janet said you cancelled all your meetings." Marcus stopped when he saw the ring box. "Why are you looking at that old thing?" Something in Marcus's tone made James look up sharply. There was a flicker of, was it fear, in his friend's eyes. "Did you know?" James asked quietly. "Know what?" "About Emma. About why she really left." Marcus's face went blank. Too blank. It was the same expression he wore during tough business negotiations. That was 15 years. Dargo, James, what does it matter now? It matters, James said, his voice getting louder, because I just found out that while I was building this empire, the woman I loved was fighting for her life, and somehow everyone knew except me. Marcus spread his hands. James, calm down, you're not thinking clearly. Whatever happened with Emma is in the past. We have more important things to worry about. The Singapore deal. Answer the question, Marcus. Did you know about Emma's condition? For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Finally, Marcus sighed. Yes, he said quietly. I knew. James felt the blood drain from his face. How long? I found out the day before the wedding. Emma came to me crying. She told me about her sister, about the bone marrow donation, about how sick she was going to be. And you didn't tell me? James's voice was deadly quiet. You were about to close the biggest deal of your career. If you had known about Emma's condition, you would have dropped everything to take care of her. All our plans, everything we had worked for, would have been ruined. So what did you do? Marcus straightened his tie, a nervous habit James had seen thousands of times in board meetings. I told her that if she really loved you, she would let you go, that you had a destiny to fulfill, and taking care of a sick wife would hold you back. I convinced her that leaving you was the only way to ensure your success. James felt like he had been punched in the stomach. All these years, he had thought Emma had abandoned him. But the truth was, she had sacrificed their love to save her sister and to protect his dreams. Get out, James said, his voice shaking. James, be reasonable. Get out, James roared, throwing the ring box at Marcus. It hit the wall beside his head. If you're still in this building in 5 minutes, I'll have security throw you out. After Marcus left, James sat at his desk, his head in his hands. His phone buzzed. Janet had sent him the information he requested about Emma. With trembling fingers, he opened the file. There was a current address, St. Mary's Hospice on the outskirts of the city. His heart stopped when he saw the admission date, 3 months ago. James grabbed his car keys. He'd waited 15 years to know the truth. He wasn't going to wait another minute. The drive to the hospice took 40 minutes. Every second felt like an hour. James's mind was full of questions. Would Emma even want to see him? What would he say to her? How sick was she? As he pulled into the hospice parking lot, his phone rang. It was Dr. Chen, probably trying to schedule his cancer treatments. He turned the phone off. Right now, nothing mattered except finding Emma. The hospice was a peaceful place, surrounded by gardens. At the reception desk, James asked for Emma Sullivan's room number. The nurse looked at him suspiciously. Miss Sullivan is very weak today. She's not accepting visitors. James pulled out his wallet and wrote a check with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. This is for the hospice, he said. Please, I need to see her. The nurse looked at the check, then at James's desperate face. Finally, she nodded. Room 215, she said. But please don't upset her. She's been through enough. James walked down the quiet hallway, his heart pounding. He stopped outside room 215. Through the window, he could see a thin figure in the bed, turned away from the door. He took a deep breath and knocked softly. There was no answer to James's knock. He hesitated, then slowly opened the door. The hospital room was small but bright, with sunlight streaming through a large window. There were fresh flowers on the bedside table and a few get-well cards, but what caught James's attention was the figure in the bed. Emma looked so different from the vibrant woman who had run out of the church 15 years ago. She was thin, too thin, and her once dark hair was streaked with grey. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. Emma, James whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment she just stared at him, as if she wasn't sure he was real. James? Her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. What are you doing here? He took a step closer. I just found out about everything, about your sister, about what you did. Emma tried to sit up, but she was too weak. James rushed forward to help her, putting an extra pillow behind her back. The familiar scent of her perfume hit him. She still wore the same one after all these years. You shouldn't be here, Emma said, looking away from him. Please leave. No. James pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth. All of it. Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. Sarah was dying. The doctors said without a bone marrow transplant she had less than a month. I was the only match in the family. She paused, taking a shaky breath. When they told me about the risks, I didn't care. She was my baby sister. I had to save her. But why didn't you tell me? James asked, his voice breaking. We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to face everything together. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Marcus came to see me the day before the wedding. He showed me the contracts for that big merger you were working on. He said if you knew about my condition, you'd give up everything to take care of me, that I'd ruin your future. He had no right, James said, anger burning in his chest. It wasn't his decision to make. I wrote you a letter, Emma continued, explaining everything. I gave it to Marcus to deliver to you after the wedding. He promised he would. James shook his head. I never got any letter. I found out later he never delivered it. By then you had become so successful. Your picture was always in the business magazines, talking about your amazing achievements. I thought Marcus had been right, that leaving, you had been the best thing for your career. Best thing? James stood up, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Emma, I've been dead inside for 15 years. Yes, I built an empire, but I lost my soul doing it. And now I find out it was all based on a lie. A nurse poked her head in the door. Is everything all right? I heard raised voices. Emma gave her a weak smile. It's fine, Mary, just catching up with an old friend. After the nurse left, James sat back down, trying to control his emotions. Tell me about Sarah, he said softly. Did the transplant work? For the first time, Emma smiled. Yes, she's healthy now. Married with 2 kids, she named her daughter Emma. And you, what happened after? The doctors warned me there might be complications, but nobody expected them to be this bad. My immune system never recovered properly. I've been in and out of hospitals ever since. She looked at him directly. Marcus has been paying all my medical bills. James felt like he'd been slapped. What? He said it was the least he could do after everything, but I think... Emma hesitated. I think he also used it to keep me quiet. As long as he was paying my bills, I couldn't risk contacting you. All these years, James said quietly, I've trusted him with everything. My company, my life. He was the only person I still believed in after you left. And now I find out he's been manipulating both of us from the beginning. Emma reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, but the gesture was so familiar it made his heart ache. I heard about your diagnosis, she said softly. The nurses were talking about it. Cancer, right? James nodded. How did you know? This is a small medical community. News travels fast. She squeezed his hand. Are you scared? The question caught him off guard. For 15 years, no one had dared ask James Matthews about his feelings. Yes, he admitted. I'm terrified. I was too at first, Emma said. But you know what I learned? Being sick teaches you what really matters. All the money, all the success, and it means nothing compared to love. James looked at their joined hands. I never took off my wedding ring, he said quietly. I wore it on a chain around my neck. Every day for 15 years. He pulled the chain out from under his shirt. The golden band gleamed in the sunlight. Emma's eyes filled with tears. James! Suddenly her face contorted in pain. She doubled over, gasping, Emma! James hit the call button frantically. Someone help! Nurses rushed in, pushing him aside. He watched helplessly as they gave her injections and checked her vital signs. Finally, after what seemed like hours, she relaxed, falling into an exhausted sleep. She needs to rest, the head nurse told James firmly. You should come back tomorrow. James nodded, but before he left, he leaned down and kissed Emma's forehead gently. I'll be back, he whispered. I promise. In his car, James made 2 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer. I want everything we have on Marcus Wright's activities for the past 15 years. Every deal, every transaction, every penny he's spent, and I want it by morning. The second call was to Janet. Cancel my schedule for the next month and find me the best doctors in the world, specialists in immune system disorders. Money is no object. I want them all here by the end of the week. As he drove home, James thought about all the years he'd wasted being angry and bitter. He thought about Emma, suffering alone while he built his empire of cold steel and glass. He thought about Marcus, playing them both like chess pieces. But mostly he thought about second chances and whether it was too late to make things right. In his mansion that night, James didn't go to his home office like he usually did. Instead, he went to the library, a room he hadn't used in years. There, in a box at the bottom of a drawer, was a stack of wedding invitations that had never been sent out. He picked one up, running his fingers over the embossed letters. James Matthews and Emma Sullivan, request the pleasure of your company. For the first time in 15 years, James Matthews cried. James barely slept that night. By 6 in the morning, he was already in his office, waiting for the files on Marcus. His lawyer, Richard Goldman, arrived personally to deliver them. "It's worse than we thought," Richard said, dropping a thick folder on James's desk. "Marcus has been stealing from the company for years, but that's not all." James opened the folder and started reading. His hands began to shake. "He's been selling our technology secrets to competitors," James said in disbelief. "And the money he used to pay Emma's medical bills, it was all company funds he embezzled." Richard nodded. "He's been careful, hiding everything through offshore accounts. But he got sloppy lately, maybe because you weren't paying attention, too focused on building the business." James thought about all the times Marcus had pushed for certain deals, had insisted on handling things personally. All the while he had been stealing, cheating, betraying. "Call the board," James ordered. "Emergency meeting, 9 a.m. At exactly 9, Marcus walked into the boardroom, straightening his expensive tie like he always did. He stopped short when he saw James sitting at the head of the table. "James, I thought you were taking time off for medical reasons." "Sit down, Marcus." James's voice was cold. "We need to talk about Emma Sullivan." Marcus's face went pale, but he tried to laugh it off. "James, I thought we settled this yesterday. That's ancient history. Like this letter." James held up a piece of paper. "The one Emma wrote to me 15 years ago. The one you promised to deliver but kept instead. Where did you get that?" "Your home safe. My security team found it last night, along with some very interesting financial documents." James turned to the board. "Members, ladies and gentlemen, I've called you here because we have a serious situation." For the next hour, James laid out everything: the stolen technology, the embezzled money, the years of manipulation. Marcus tried to interrupt several times, but James silenced him with a look. "You're fired," James finally said, "and you'll be hearing from our lawyers. I want every penny you stole returned, with interest." "You can't do this to me," Marcus shouted, jumping to his feet. "I made you what you are. Without me, you'd be nothing." "Without you," James said quietly, "I might have had 15 years of happiness with the woman I love. Instead, I became a cold, heartless machine, just like you wanted." Security guards appeared to escort Marcus out. At the door, he turned back. "She'll die, you know," he sneered. "Emma, the doctors gave her 6 months at most. You're throwing everything away for a dying woman." James stood up slowly. "No, Marcus. I'm finally becoming human again, something you never understood." After Marcus was gone, James addressed the board. "I'm taking a leave of absence. My cancer treatments will start soon, and..." He paused. "There's someone I need to take care of." He drove straight to the hospice. Emma was awake, looking better than yesterday. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You came back," she said softly. "I promised, didn't I?" He sat beside her bed. "I fired Marcus this morning." Emma's eyes widened. "James, you didn't have to..." "Yes, I did. He's been stealing from the company for years, everything he used to pay your medical bills. It was all stolen money." He took her hand. "But that doesn't matter now. I've hired the best doctors in the world. They're flying in this week." "James," Emma's voice was gentle. "The doctors here have already tried everything. There's nothing more they can do." "There has to be." His voice broke. "I just found you again. I can't lose you." "Oh, James." Emma touched his face. "You never lost me. I've loved you every day. For the past 15 years. Tears ran down James's face. "Then marry me." "What?" He pulled out the chain with his wedding ring. "Marry me, Emma, right here, right now. I don't want to waste another day. But your cancer treatments, we'll face it together. Whatever time we have left, whether it's 6 months or 6 years, I want to spend it as your husband." Emma smiled through her tears. Yes, the hospice chaplain performed the ceremony right there in Emma's room. The nurses served as witnesses, crying happy tears as James and Emma exchanged their rings, the same ones they'd almost used 15 years ago. "I've waited 15 years to do this," James said, and kissed his bride. That night, James had a hospital bed moved into Emma's room so he could stay with her. As they lay in the darkness, holding hands across the space between their beds, Emma said, "Tell me about your cancer. What did the doctors say?" "It's aggressive," James admitted, "but I'm going to fight it with everything I have. I have something to live for now." "We'll fight together," Emma said, "like we should have done 15 years ago." The next few days were a whirlwind. James arranged for Emma to be moved to a private medical facility where they could both receive treatment. The world's top specialists arrived, bringing new hope with experimental treatments. But more importantly, James and Emma had time to talk, to share all the stories of the years they'd missed. Emma told him about Sarah's recovery, about becoming an aunt, about all the small moments of joy she'd found even in her illness. James told her about his loneliness, about how empty success had felt without her. "I used to drive by our old apartment sometimes," he confessed, "remembering how happy we were there before all the money and success. We were so young," Emma said, "so full of dreams. We still can be." James squeezed her hand. "Different. Dreams maybe, but still ours." One morning, James woke up to find Emma watching him from her bed. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About Marcus," she said. "Have you heard what happened to him?" James nodded. "He tried to flee the country, but the FBI caught him at the airport. He'll go to prison for a long time." "Do you hate him?" James thought for a moment. "No," he said finally. "In a strange way, I feel sorry for him. He never understood that real happiness isn't about money or power. It's about love." Emma smiled. "You've changed. You changed me again." He got up and carefully sat on the edge of her bed. "You know what today is? Thursday? It's March 15th. 15 years exactly since you donated your bone marrow to Sarah. The day everything changed." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "James, I have something for you." He pulled out a small box. Inside was a new ring, smaller and simpler than her original engagement ring, but somehow more beautiful. "But we're already married," Emma protested. "This isn't an engagement ring," James explained. "It's a promise ring. A promise that no matter what happens with our treatments, no matter how much time we have left, we'll face it together. No more secrets, no more sacrifices alone." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, James knew that even if their time together was short, it would be filled with more love and meaning than all his years of empty success. Outside their window, the sun rose on a new day, bringing with it new hope, new challenges, and the chance to make every moment count. A month after their hospital room wedding, James and Emma settled into a new routine at the private medical facility. Their rooms had been combined into a comfortable suite, with large windows overlooking a beautiful garden. Every morning, they would sit together and watch the sunrise, grateful for another day together. "Your first chemotherapy session is today," Emma said one morning, squeezing James's hand. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," James admitted, "but having you here makes it easier." Just then, there was a knock at the door. A young woman stood there, holding two small children by the hand. She looked so much like Emma that James knew immediately who she was. "Sarah?" he asked. Emma's sister burst into tears and ran to hug them both. "Emma didn't tell me you were back together until yesterday," she said, wiping her eyes. "I came as soon as I could." The children, a girl about 6 and a boy about 4, looked confused. Sarah knelt down beside them. "Emma, Jack, this is your Aunt Emma, who you were named after," she said to the little girl. "And this is your Uncle James." Little Emma walked over to the bed and looked at her aunt seriously. "Mommy says you gave her your bone marrow and made her better." "That's right, sweetheart," Emma said softly. "And now you're sick?" "Yes, but the doctors are trying very hard to make me better." The little girl climbed onto the bed and gave Emma a tight hug. "I'll give you some of my bone marrow if you need it," she declared. Everyone in the room felt tears coming to their eyes. James picked up little Jack, who had been hiding behind his mother. "How about we go find some ice cream in the cafeteria?" he suggested. "Give your mom and aunt some time to talk." After James left with the children, Sarah sat on Emma's bed. "I can't believe he's really here," she said. "After all these years." "Marcus finally confessed everything," Emma explained, "about how he manipulated us, stole from the company." "That snake!" Sarah's face darkened. "I never trusted him. The way he would show up at the hospital, acting like he was doing you such a big favor by paying your bills. None of that matters now," Emma said. "James and I are together again. That's all I care about." Sarah took her sister's hand. "The doctors called me yesterday. They said—" Her voice broke. "They said I should come quickly, that you don't have much time left." Emma nodded calmly. "I know. But Sarah, listen to me. These past few weeks with James have been worth everything. I don't have any regrets anymore." "It's not fair," Sarah cried. "You saved my life and now I get to spend my last days with the man I love, surrounded by my family. That's more than enough." When James returned with the children, he found the sisters laughing together, looking at old photos on Sarah's phone. His heart squeezed at the sight of Emma's smile, so bright despite her illness. That afternoon, James had his first chemotherapy session. Emma insisted on sitting with him through it, even though she was weak herself. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly when he tried to protest. We promised to face everything together. Remember, the treatment was brutal. James spent hours being sick afterward, but Emma never left his side. She held his hand, wiped his face with a cool cloth, and told him stories about her niece and nephew to distract him from the pain. A week later, they received unexpected visitors. James's parents, who he hadn't spoken to in years, showed up at the medical facility. "We saw the news about Marcus," his mother said hesitantly. "And then we heard about everything." James's father, a proud man who had never approved of his son's cold business tactics, had tears in his eyes. "Son, we were wrong," he said. "About Emma. About the kind of life we thought you should live. We were wrong about everything." James looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "Come in," he said to his parents. "There's someone you should meet. Properly this time." Over the next few hours, the families began to heal. James's mother fussed over Emma, insisting on rearranging her pillows and ordering special meals from the kitchen. His father talked about converting their beach house into a place where James and Emma could rest between treatments. "The sea air would be good for you both," he insisted. That night, after everyone had left, Emma noticed James was quiet. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I wasted so much time," he said. 15 years of pushing everyone away, being angry. And all along there was so much love available, if I had just been willing to see it. "We can't change the past," Emma said gently, "but we can make the most of now." James pulled out a notebook, something very unlike his usual digital devices. "What's that?" Emma asked. "A bucket list," he said. "Things I want us to do together, even if we have to do them right here in this room." He started reading. Number 1, dance under the stars. That very night, James arranged for the medical staff to help them onto the facility's roof garden. Under a clear night sky with Emma in her wheelchair and James pushing his IV stand, they swayed gently to their old favorite songs. Number 2, James continued the next morning, watch the sunrise from every window in this place. And so they did, moving Emma's wheelchair to a different window each dawn, making up stories about the people they could see in the gardens below. Number 3, read all the books we used to talk about in college but never got around to. They took turns, reading to each other, doing different voices for the characters, laughing at their terrible attempts at accents. Sarah brought the children to visit every weekend. Little Emma would crawl into bed with her aunt, while Jack showed Uncle James his toy cars. They filled the sterile medical suite with the sounds of family, of life, of love. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Emma said suddenly, "I want to meet her." "Who?" "The little girl who received my bone marrow donation at the children's hospital. The one before Sarah. I never knew what happened to her." James immediately called his private investigator. Within days, they located Maria Gonzalez, now a healthy 20-year-old college student. When Maria walked into their room, Emma began to cry. "I was in the hospital bed next to you," Maria said, holding Emma's hand. "You told me stories every night, even though you were in pain yourself. You gave me hope." "I never knew if you made it," Emma whispered. "I did, thanks to you. And now I'm studying to be a pediatric oncology nurse. I want to help other children, the way you helped me." That night, James added another item to their bucket list. Number 27, create a foundation to help match bone marrow donors with children in need. "The Emma Sullivan Foundation," he said proudly. "It will be your legacy." Emma smiled weakly. They both knew she was getting weaker, but they refused to let that stop them from living every moment fully. "Read me the rest of the list," she said, snuggling against him in their now shared hospital bed. As James read about all the small and big dreams they still hoped to achieve, they held each other close, grateful for their second chance at love, no matter how brief it might be. Dr. Chen burst into James and Emma's room early one morning, waving a stack of papers. "We found something," she exclaimed, "in James's latest blood tests." Emma sat up straighter in her bed while James put down his morning coffee. "What is it?" they asked together. "James's chemotherapy is working better than we expected, Doctor," Chen explained. "His body is responding incredibly well to the treatment, but that's not all." She turned to Emma. "We found something unusual in his blood work, something that could help you." Hope flickered in Emma's eyes for the first time in weeks. "What do you mean?" "James's blood shows a unique antibody response we've never seen before. We think it might help strengthen your immune system." James grabbed the doctor's arm. "Are you saying I could help Emma the way she helped Sarah?" "It's experimental," Dr. Chen warned. "We'd need to do more tests, and it could be dangerous for you, James. Your body is already fighting cancer." "I'll do it," James said immediately. "James, no!" Emma protested. "You're still in the middle of your treatments. It's too risky." James took her hand. "For 15 years, you carried the burden of sacrifice alone. You gave up everything. Our love, your health, your future, to save Sarah. Now it's my turn." Tears ran down Emma's face. "I can't let you risk your life for me." "That's exactly what you did for Sarah," James reminded her. "And what you were willing to do for me, leaving me so I could follow my dreams." He turned to Dr. Chen. "What do you need from me?" The next few days were filled with tests. The medical team worked around the clock, studying James's blood, running simulations, consulting with specialists around the world. Finally, Dr. Chen called a meeting with both families present. Sarah sat holding Emma's hand, while James's parents stood nervously by the window. Little Emma and Jack played quietly in the corner, sensing the tension in the room. The procedure would involve harvesting specific cells from James's bone marrow, Dr. Chen explained. "We believe these cells, combined with the antibodies his body is producing, could help rebuild Emma's immune system." "And the risks?" Sarah asked. "For James, they're significant. The procedure could weaken his immune system when he needs it most to fight the cancer. For Emma," Dr. Chen paused, "it's her best chance, but there are no guarantees." James's mother stepped forward. "Isn't there another way? Some other treatment?" "We've tried everything else," Dr. Chen said gently. "This is our last option." James stood up. "Then we're doing it." That night, after everyone had left, Emma couldn't sleep. She watched James dozing in the bed next to hers, moonlight falling on his face. "I know you're watching me," he said without opening his eyes. "How did you know?" "I always know." He turned to face her. "You're worried." "Of course I'm worried." Emma's voice broke. "James, you could die, or we could both live." He got up and carefully sat on her bed. "Emma, when you left me at that church, you did it to save Sarah and to give me a chance at success. You sacrificed everything for love. Now it's my turn to show you what real love means." Emma touched his face. "You already have these past weeks with you. They've meant everything to me. Then let me do this. Let me fight for us the way you fought for Sarah." The next morning they began preparing for the procedure. The medical team wanted to start as soon as possible, while James was still strong enough. Sarah brought something special to the hospital, Emma's old diary from 15 years ago. She had found it while cleaning out their parents' house. "I thought you might want to read it together," she said. That evening, James and Emma sat side by side in Emma's bed, reading her words from the past. "March 10th, 2010, James read aloud. "Today I found out I'm a match for Sarah. The doctors explained the risks, but how can I not do this? She's my baby sister. When I held her the day she was born, I promised I would always protect her." Emma wiped away tears as James continued, reading. "March 14th, 2010. Tomorrow is the procedure. I'm scared, but not about the pain. I'm scared about James. How can I tell him? How can I risk ruining his dreams? Marcus showed me the contracts today. James is so close to everything he's worked for." James's voice shook as he read the next entry, March 18th, 2010. "The procedure is done. Sarah is responding well. The pain is worse than I expected, but that's nothing compared to the pain in my heart. James is probably waking up right now, wondering why I left him at the altar. Marcus promised to explain everything to him after the merger is complete. I pray James will understand someday that I did this because I love him too much to hold him back." They spent the night before the procedure talking about all the dreams they still had. James shared his plans for the Emma Sullivan Foundation, how it would help match bone marrow donors with patients, provide financial support for families, and fund research into immune disorders. "We'll run it together," he insisted. "Once we're both better." Emma smiled. "Tell me more about what we'll do." "We'll buy that little cottage by the sea you always wanted, plant a garden full of roses, have Sunday dinners with Sarah and the kids." As dawn approached, the medical team came to prep them for surgery. Dr. Chen found them asleep in Emma's bed, holding hands. "It's time," she said softly. Before they were taken to separate operating rooms, James and Emma shared one last moment. "I love you," Emma whispered. "I love you too." James kissed her gently. "See you on the other side." As they were wheeled away, little Emma and Jack arrived with Sarah. The little girl ran to her aunt's gurney. "We made you something." She handed Emma a crayon drawing of a rainbow over a hospital. "It's for good luck," Jack added. Emma held the drawing close. "It's perfect." In the operating room, as the anesthesia began to take effect, Emma's last thought was of James. Not the successful businessman he had become, but the young man who had loved her completely, who was now risking everything to save her just as she had once risked everything to save Sarah. The surgeries would take hours. In the waiting room, both families came together. James's parents, Sarah and her children, even some of the nurses who had grown close to the couple. They held hands, prayed, and waited for news. Above them, in separate operating rooms, two people who had lost 15 years together fought once again to find their way back to each other. This time not through time or distance or misunderstandings, but through the very blood in their veins. Outside the hospital windows, the sun rose on a new day, bringing with it the possibility of miracles born from love and sacrifice. The waiting room was silent, except for the soft sound of Sarah's children sleeping on the chairs. 12 hours had passed since James and Emma went into surgery. Dr. Chen had come out periodically to give updates, but the last hour had brought no news. James's mother paced back and forth, clutching her rosary. His father stared out the window, his face drawn with worry. Sarah sat with her sleeping children, gently stroking their hair. Finally, Dr. Chen appeared, still wearing her surgical scrubs. Everyone stood up. "The surgeries are complete," she announced. "Emma is in recovery. The procedure went as well as we could have hoped." "And James?" his mother asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Chen's face grew serious. "There were complications. His body was weaker than we expected from the chemotherapy." "He's in intensive care," Sarah gasped. "Will he be okay?" "The next 24 hours will be critical. We're doing everything we can." In the recovery room, Emma slowly opened her eyes. Through the fog of anesthesia, she heard the steady beeping of monitors. "James," she whispered. A nurse came to her bedside. "Try not to talk, Mrs. Matthews. You need to rest." "Where's James? I need to see him." The nurse looked uncomfortable. "He's in intensive care. As soon as you're stronger." "No," Emma tried to sit up. "Take me to him now, please." After consulting with Dr. Chen, they agreed to wheel Emma's bed into James's ICU room. The sight of him made her heart stop. He was pale and still, connected to multiple machines. His breathing was shallow. "Oh, James," Emma whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. "What have you done?" For 3 days, Emma refused to leave James's side. Though she was supposed to be in her own recovery room, the medical staff gave up trying to separate them. They moved her bed next to his in the ICU. Emma talked to him constantly, reminding him of their plans, their dreams. She read to him from her old diary, sharing memories of their college days, of their first date, of all the little moments that had made them fall in love. On the 4th day, something amazing happened. Emma's latest test results came back. Her immune system was showing signs of improvement. The procedure, despite its toll on James, seemed to be working. "You see?" she told James's unconscious form. "You did it. You saved me. Now please, save yourself too." That night, Emma woke to feel James's hand squeezing hers weakly. "James," she sat up carefully. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. "Emma?" His voice was barely a whisper. Emma burst into tears of joy. "I'm here. I'm right here." James tried to smile. "Did it work?" "Yes, my love. The doctors say my body is accepting the treatment. My immune system is getting stronger." "Good." His eyes started to close again. "Worth it." Over the next few weeks, they both began to recover. Emma grew stronger each day, able to walk short distances. James's progress was slower, but steady. They moved back to their private suite, where their families visited daily. Little Emma and Jack filled their room with drawings and stories. They would climb carefully onto James's bed, mindful of his tubes and wires, and tell him about their school days. One afternoon, while the children were napping and Emma was having tests done, Marcus's lawyer came to see James. "Mr. Wright wanted you to have this," the lawyer said, placing a letter on James's bedside table. "He wrote it before he took his own life in prison last night." James stared at the envelope for a long time after the lawyer left. When Emma returned from her tests, she found him holding the unopened letter. "Do you want me to read it to you?" she asked gently. James nodded. Emma opened the letter and began to read. "Dear James, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I couldn't face the shame of a trial, of everyone knowing what I did to you and Emma. But more than that, I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. You were my best friend, and I destroyed your life because I was jealous. I saw how perfect you, and Emma were together, how pure your love was. I had never known love like that. My whole life was about money and power. I thought if I could make you like me, cold, focused only on success, then maybe I wouldn't feel so alone. I told myself I was helping you both, that Emma would only hold you back, that you needed to be free to achieve greatness. But the truth is, I was the one holding you back. Real greatness isn't about money or power. It's about the capacity to love and sacrifice for others, something you and Emma understood all along. I'm leaving everything I have to the Emma Sullivan Foundation. It's not much compared to what I stole from you both, 15 years of happiness, but maybe it can help other people find the kind of love I was too broken to understand. I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing after everything I did, but I am sorry. Goodbye, Marcus. Emma folded the letter and looked at James. Are you okay? James was quiet for a long moment. I spent 15 years hating him. Now, I just feel sad he never understood what really mattered in life, which is this. James took her hand. Love, family. The way little Emma's face lights up when she shows me her drawings, the sound of Jack's laugh, the feeling of holding your hand as we watch the sunrise. All the things I forgot about when I was trying to be the man Marcus wanted me to be. Just then, Sarah arrived with the children. Little Emma ran to show James her latest drawing, a picture of their whole family together outside a house by the sea. That's where we'll live when you get better, she announced proudly. Mommy says we can visit every weekend. James smiled at Emma over the little girl's head. Every weekend, he agreed, and we'll have big family dinners and plant a garden. And get a dog? Jack asked hopefully. And get a dog, James promised. That night, as they lay in their separate hospital beds pushed close together, Emma said, I got my latest test results back. James turned to look at her, worried. And? Dr. Chen says I'm strong enough to leave the hospital. My immune system is almost normal. Emma, that's wonderful. But I'm not leaving without you, she added firmly. We promised to face everything. Together, remember? James squeezed her hand. The beach house my parents offered us, do you think we could turn it into a recovery center? A place where patients and their families could stay while they're having treatment? Another branch of the foundation. Yes, a place of healing, not just for bodies, but for hearts too, like this room has been for us. Emma smiled. I love that idea. Outside their window, a full moon rose over the city. In its light, two people who had lost and found each other again held hands across their hospital beds, planning a future they once thought impossible, a future built not on success or power, but on love, family, and the healing power of second chances. 3 months after their surgeries, James and Emma finally left the hospital. The day was bright and clear, perfect for new beginnings. Their families waited in the parking lot with balloons and welcome home signs made by little Emma and Jack. Ready? James asked, pushing Emma's wheelchair, even though he still wasn't very strong himself. More than ready, Emma replied, holding the small box containing their wedding rings, both the original ones and the new promise ring James had given her. Instead of going to James's mansion in the city, they headed to his parents' beach house. The drive took 2 hours, during which Emma held James's hand while he dozed in the back of the car. The chemotherapy still made him tired, but his doctors were optimistic. The cancer was responding well to treatment. When they arrived, Emma gasped. The beach house wasn't the simple cottage she had imagined. It was a beautiful 3-story home right on the water, with a wraparound porch and huge windows facing the ocean. Welcome home, James's mother said, helping Emma out of the car while James's father helped him. Inside, they found Sarah and the children had been busy. The house was decorated with fresh flowers, and delicious smells came from the kitchen. We're having a welcome home party, little Emma announced proudly. But first, Sarah said, you both need to see something. She led them to what had once been the house's garage. It had been converted into a state-of-the-art medical suite with everything they needed for their ongoing treatments. The doctors can come here now, Sarah explained. No more hospital visits unless absolutely necessary. James looked around in amazement. How did you do all this so quickly? Your foundation paid for it, Sarah said with a smile. It's a test run for the recovery centers we're planning to build. If this setup works for you two, we'll use it as a model for other patients. Emma squeezed James's hand. Their dream of helping other families was already coming true. That evening, they had their first family dinner in their new home. Little Emma and Jack had set the table themselves, even though the silverware didn't match and some of the plates were backward. To new beginnings, James's father proposed a toast. As they ate, they talked about their plans, The foundation was growing faster than anyone had expected. Marcus's money, combined with James's resources, meant they could help hundreds of families dealing with serious illnesses. "We've already had 30 applications for the first recovery center," Sarah reported. She was working as the foundation's director now. Families who need a place to stay while their loved ones get treatment. "And guess what?" little Emma piped up. "My class is doing a fundraiser for the foundation. We're selling cookies." James ruffled her hair. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Every little bit helps." After dinner, while the others cleaned up, James and Emma went out to the porch. The sound of waves calmed them both. Emma sat in James's lap, sharing a blanket against the cool evening air. "I got a call from the board today," James said quietly. Emma turned to look at him. "And? They want me to come back as CEO. What did you tell them?" "I said no." James kissed her forehead. "I'm not that person anymore. I don't want to be the Ice King again. I'm going to focus on the foundation instead." Emma smiled. "Are you sure? You worked so hard to build that company." "The company can run without me. Right now there are families like yours and Sarah's who need help. That's more important than any business deal." Just then, they heard excited barking. Jack came running out to the porch. "Uncle James, Aunt Emma, come see." They followed him inside to find a golden retriever puppy wearing a red bow. "His name is Lucky," little Emma announced, "because we're all so lucky to be together." The puppy bounded over to James and Emma, tail wagging furiously. Emma knelt to pet him, laughing as he covered her face with kisses. "You remembered," she said to James, "that you always wanted a golden retriever." "Of course I did." James sat beside her on the floor, letting the puppy climb into his lap. "I remember everything about our early days together, like how you used to talk about having a house by the sea and a dog and Sunday family dinners. And now we have it all," Emma said softly. That night, after everyone had gone home and the puppy was asleep in his new bed, James and Emma sat in their bedroom overlooking the ocean. The moon made a silver path across the water. "I have something to tell you," Emma said, taking James's hand. "Dr. Chen called with my latest test results." James held his breath, waiting. "The treatment worked better than anyone expected, she says. She says I might have years, not months, years to spend with you and our family." James pulled her close, tears running down his face. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God. And your cancer? Still fighting, but the doctors are optimistic. They say having you here, being happy, it's helping me heal." Emma touched his face gently. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" "Better than okay." James pulled out a small notebook, their bucket list. "We still have a lot of dreams to fulfill." Emma looked at the list. Many items were already checked off, but many more remained. Plant a rose garden, learn to sail, watch little Emma's, school play, teach Jack to fish, open the first recovery center, renew our vows on the beach, travel to all the places we talked about in college, write our story to inspire others. "We have time now," James said, holding her close. "Time to do everything we dreamed of." Outside their window, Lucky barked at something in the garden. From down the hall, they could hear the gentle hum of the medical equipment that kept them both alive, a reminder that their journey wasn't over, that there would still be hard days ahead. But now they had what they had missed for 15 years, each other, and the love that had survived betrayal, illness, and time itself. They had their family, their purpose with the foundation, and most importantly, they had hope. Emma took out their wedding rings, slipping them on both their fingers. "These rings have quite a story now," she said. "The best kind of story," James replied, "one with a happy ending." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the sound of waves a gentle lullaby, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, just as they should have done 15 years ago. 6 months after moving to the beach house, James and Emma stood in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was their first time back since that fateful day 15 years ago when Emma had run away. "Are you sure about this?" James asked, squeezing her hand. Emma nodded. "It's time." They walked through the huge wooden doors together. The church looked exactly the same. The stained glass windows, the long aisle, the altar where their lives had changed forever. But this time, they weren't there for a wedding. They were there to announce the opening of the first Emma Sullivan Foundation Recovery Center, which would be built right next door to the church. "It feels right," Emma had told the foundation's board, "taking a place of heartbreak and turning it into a place of healing." The press conference was packed. Reporters who had once documented their broken wedding now eagerly covered their story of love, sacrifice, and redemption. But the most important people in the audience weren't the reporters. They were the families who would be helped by the new center. James stepped up to the microphone, looking healthy and strong after his latest round of treatment. Emma sat beside him, glowing with renewed health herself. 15 years ago, James began, I stood in this church and learned a painful lesson about love and sacrifice. My fiancée left me at the altar, not because she didn't love me, but because she loved her sister enough to risk everything to save her life. He looked at Emma, who wiped away tears. What I didn't know then was that love sometimes means letting go. Emma let me go so I could pursue success, while she fought a silent battle with her health. But true love always finds its way back. Today, we're turning our story of loss into one of hope. Sarah joined them at the podium, carrying architectural plans. The Emma Sullivan Foundation Recovery Center will provide free housing for families while their loved ones undergo treatment, she explained. Each suite will be equipped like the one we tested at our beach house. Families can stay together, supporting each other through the healing process. Little Emma and Jack, dressed in their Sunday best, unveiled a model of the building. It was beautiful, a modern structure of glass and stone with gardens and play areas for children. But that's not all, James continued. Thanks to a generous donation from Marcus Wright's estate, we're also establishing a research fund. We'll be working with top medical institutions to study immune disorders and develop new treatments. After the press conference, Maria Gonzalez, the young nurse who had received Emma's bone marrow before Sarah, approached them with exciting news. I've been accepted to medical school, she announced, and I want to specialize in immunology. The Foundation's scholarship program is making it possible. Emma hugged her tightly. You're going to help so many people, Maria. That evening, they held a celebration dinner at the beach house. The huge dining room was full of people whose lives had been touched by Emma and James's story. There was Dr. Chen, who had never given up on either of them. The nurses who had cared for them during their darkest days. Sarah and her children, who had helped turn their beach house into a model for future recovery centers. Even James's former board members were there, now fully supportive of his decision to focus on the foundation rather than the company. Lucky, no longer a puppy but a gentle therapy dog in training, moved from guest to guest, offering comfort and joy like he did for patients at the beach house. During dinner, little Emma stood up to make an announcement. I decided what I want to be when I grow up, she declared. I want to be a doctor like Dr. Chen, so I can help people like Aunt Emma and Uncle James. And I want to help run the foundation, Jack added, not wanting to be left out. James looked around the table at all these people who had become their family. He thought about Marcus and how he had never understood that true success wasn't about money or power. Later that night, James and Emma walked on the beach with Lucky. The moon was full, just like the night they had first come home to the beach house. I got a letter today, Emma said, from a teenage girl in Ohio. She needs a bone marrow transplant for her little brother, but her parents are worried about the risks. What did you tell her? I told her our story, about how love is stronger than fear, and how sometimes the greatest gift we can give is ourselves. James stopped walking and turned to face her. Do you regret it? Any of it? Emma thought for a moment. The only thing I regret is not trusting our love enough to tell you the truth from the beginning, but everything else. Saving Sarah, finding our way back to each other, building the foundation. It all happened exactly as it was meant to. Just then, Sarah's car pulled up to the beach house. Through the window, they could see little Emma and Jack had fallen asleep in the back seat. They're staying the weekend, Emma reminded him. Jack wants you to teach him how to fish tomorrow. James smiled. And little Emma has a dance recital next week. It's on our bucket list, remember? They walked back to the house, where the medical equipment still hummed quietly in their private suite. But it wasn't the focus of their lives anymore. Instead, their home was filled with children's laughter, family dinners, and the joy of helping others. In James's office, the original wedding ring sat in its box next to a photo from their hospital room wedding. Both rings, the old and the new, told the story of a love that had survived 15 years of separation, illness, and misunderstanding. But more than that, they told the story of two people who had turned their pain into purpose, their loss into legacy, and their broken dreams into hope for others. As they got ready for bed, Emma took out their bucket list. Many items were checked. Off now. Plant a rose garden, done, it was blooming beautifully. Learn to sail, James was taking lessons. Watch little Emma's school play, she had starred as a tree. Teach Jack to fish, tomorrow's project. Open the first recovery center, starting construction next month. Renew our vows on the beach, planned for their first anniversary. We still have so much to do, Emma said, snuggling close to James. And now we have time to do it all, he replied, holding her tight. Through their window they could see the ocean, endless and eternal like their love. The sound of waves reminded them that life, like the tide, had its own rhythm of giving and taking, of loss and return. But most importantly, it reminded them that every ending could be a new beginning, if you just had the courage to love enough, forgive enough, and believe in second chances. 1 year to the day after James and Emma moved into the beach house, they stood barefoot in the sand, surrounded by their loved ones. It was sunset, and they were finally having the beach wedding they had dreamed about during those long nights in the hospital. Emma wore a simple white dress that danced in the ocean breeze. James looked handsome and healthy in his light linen suit. Little Emma scattered rose petals from their garden, while Jack proudly carried both sets of rings, the original wedding rings and their promise rings, on a small pillow. Lucky, wearing a bow tie, sat perfectly behaved between Sarah and James's parents. In the audience were dozens of families who had been helped by the foundation, including Maria Gonzalez, now in her first year of medical school. 1 year ago, Emma said in her vows, we were both fighting for our lives, but love gave us the strength to heal. James, you risked everything to save me, just like I once risked everything to save Sarah. That's what real love is, being willing to give everything for someone else's happiness. James wiped tears from his eyes before speaking his own vows. Emma, 15 years ago I thought losing you was the end of my story. I became cold, focused only on success and power. But you taught me that true success is measured in love, in family, in the lives we touch. Today, I'm not just renewing my vows to be your husband. I'm promising to spend every day living the lessons you taught me about love and sacrifice. Dr. Chen, who had become a close friend, stood up to make a special announcement. As Emma and James's doctor, I'm overjoyed to share some miraculous news, she said. James's latest scans show no signs of cancer, and Emma's immune system is completely normal. Their love didn't just heal their hearts, it helped heal their bodies too. The beach erupted in cheers and applause. Little Emma and Jack hugged their aunt and uncle, while Sarah cried happy tears. After the ceremony, during the reception on the beach house lawn, James clinked his glass for attention. We have our own announcement to make, he said, holding Emma's hand. The Emma Sullivan Foundation has just received approval to build 5 more recovery centers across the country. And thanks to Maria's research proposal, we're starting a new program to study the connection between emotional support and physical healing. But that's not all, Emma added with a glowing smile. We've also been approved to become foster parents. There are so many sick children who need a loving home during their treatment. Little Emma jumped up excitedly. Does this mean I'm going to be a cousin? It means, James said, hugging her, that our family is going to keep growing just like our love. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep upstairs, James and Emma walked on the beach, under the stars. They stopped at the spot where they had just renewed their vows. Do you remember what you told me in the hospital? Emma asked. About wanting to check everything off our bucket list? James pulled out the worn notebook. We've done pretty well this year. Emma took it from him and wrote something new at the bottom of the list. James read it and his eyes filled with tears. Build a family as big as our hearts. Are you sure you're ready? He asked. Taking in sick children, giving them a home during treatment. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Emma replied. But look at everything love has already accomplished. She gestured toward the beach house where lights glowed warmly in the windows. In the medical suite, now used more for foundation research than their own treatment, they could see Dr. Chen working late, studying the miracle of their recovery. In the garden, roses bloomed under the moonlight, roses they had planted together during James's chemotherapy, when some days just walking outside had been a victory. And on the bulletin board in the kitchen, among the children's drawings and family photos, hung the original hospital whiteboard where they had first written their bucket list. 15 years ago, Emma said softly, love gave me the strength to walk away from you to save my sister. 1 year ago, love gave you the strength to risk your life to save me. Now love is giving us both the chance to help others. And this time, James added, pulling her close, we're doing it together. They walked back to the house hand in hand. Through the windows, they could see their family. Photos on the walls, pictures of their hospital room wedding, of little Emma's dance recital, of Jack's first fishing trip, photos of the foundation's opening, of families finding hope in their recovery centers, of love multiplying in endless ways. In their bedroom, the two rings boxes sat side by side on their dresser. The first contained their original wedding rings, symbols of a love that refused to die even through 15 years of separation. The second held their promise rings, proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds. But the greatest proof wasn't in the rings or the photos, or even the foundation, till it bore Emma's name. It was in the simple fact that they were here, together, healthy and whole, ready to share their love with children who needed it most. Emma took both sets of rings and put them on. "Something old, something new," she said with a smile. "Something borrowed, something blue," James finished, pointing out their window to the ocean. In the distance, they could hear the waves breaking on the shore, constant, eternal, like the love that had brought them back together. Above them, stars sparkled like the diamonds in Emma's rings, reminding them that even in the darkest times, light finds a way to shine through. "Ready for our next adventure?" James asked. Emma kissed him softly. "With you? Always." And so their story came full circle. The wedding ring that Emma had returned in St. Patrick's Cathedral 15 years ago had started a journey neither of them could have imagined. A journey that proved love was more powerful than time, stronger than illness, greater than success or wealth or power. Their love had not only healed them, it had created a legacy that would help heal others for generations to come. Through the foundation, through their future foster children, through all the lives they would touch, their story would live on. Because in the end, life's greatest truth was the one they had both learned through pain and sacrifice. Love, real love, never dies. It only grows stronger, reaching out to embrace more hearts, heal more hurts, and create more miracles. As they fell asleep in each other's arms, their rings glinting in the moonlight, they knew that their story wasn't really ending. It was just beginning again, as all the best love stories do. The end.